Here we are talking about Romans chapter 7.
Romans 7. This is a big one.
This is a big one, but we've also been talking about 6, 5 and 4, haven't we?
We have been. Go back there first.
So we've been here for hours.
We have. We've
up
been
to
here
this
for a little
point.
while. Yep,
Yeah.
that's all right. We knew this was going to be a big chapter.
Do you recommend people go back and listen to the others if they haven't listened to
if
this?
you've got time. Yeah. Romans 7, you may be able to get some stuff out of Romans 7 on its own or without having to listen to everything else. But that's not to say it isn't a sequential build. It'll make a lot more sense to you if you build on the others. But I would say with Romans 5 and 6, you probably needed to have listened to the chapter before to see where Paul was going.
Yeah, because Paul builds, doesn't he?
He does.
He
He always builds through.
He loops back, like something he said in chapter 2, he pulls that again later on.
Which is how any good piece of literature works. You know, you're always, what do you call it, arcs and story arcs and
twists, turns.
What's the thing you say? Plot points. That's the one. Seed a plot point somewhere and pick it up somewhere else. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and Paul is doing that really well, and he's getting towards the climax, I think, in
the
next one.
It is. And N.T. Wright, since you've written that book that you've been researching here about Paul for Everyone, N.T. Wright's just recently brought out a brand new book called, I haven't read it yet, Into the Heart of Romans. And I think he argues that Romans 8:1, or thereabouts, is the centre and the pivot point upon which the entire argument of Romans builds.
I started to read that one,
Did
but
you?
I
haven't.
On the back of this one.
On the back of this one, I haven't done that yet. I think it might even be sitting in my library, but I haven't looked at it yet. I've just heard him talk about it on podcasts and things. Yeah.
Yeah. Read N.T. Wright on anything, Paul, and you're doing pretty well.
Well, he's the world's primary Pauline scholar. Yeah.
And he seems like a lovely man.
Oh, he's a very gracious old man. Yeah, he's very nice.
Yes. Don't call him an old man.
Well, he's probably late 70s, I suppose. That makes him older.
Oh, so what?
Wise. Well, he just comes across as like a loving older man that I would love just to sit and listen to. I don't think he'd tell me off. I think he'd be really warm and embracive. And now, listen here, young fella. Even as a 52-year-old, he'd be saying to me, listen here, young fella, I've got something to say to you. And it'd be like in a loving way, you know.
All right, let's just
you
can
get back
see
to
we really,
Romans 7.
really like the guy.
Yeah.
Okay, here, Romans 7. My Bible here, the message starts off, it gives the heading for this chapter, torn between one way and another. And we talked a little bit about this on the previous
This is
chapter.
about the separation between the old landlord and the new landlord.
Yes.
Yeah, the sin and the new life. Yep.
Yes, which is what N.T. Wright,
the analogy he
that
used.
idea is his, yes. Okay, so here N.T. Wright says that Paul starts this off with an illustration. He says it's perhaps not the best illustration, but he's trying to make a point. Where a death occurs, it releases a person from obligation.
This is what you're right. It's very courageous of him to say it's not a best illustration because I've never heard that, but I've often thought that. I'm thinking for someone who's intelligent, Paul seems to use an analogy, but then the analogy needs to be reversed to make sense of it. So let's see where it goes.
Okay, so verse 1, you shouldn't have any trouble understanding this, friends, for you know all the ins and outs of the law, which is Moses' law, the Old Testament law, how it works and how its power touches only the living. For instance, a wife is legally tied to her husband while he lives, at least in this culture, but if he dies, she's free. If she lives with another man while her husband is living, she's obviously, in that culture, an adulteress. But if he dies, she is quite free to marry another man in good conscience, with no one's disapproval. So, my friends, this is something like what has taken place with you. When Christ died, he took that entire rule-dominated way of life down with him and left it in the tomb, leaving you free to marry a resurrection life and bear offspring of faith for God. For as long as we have lived that old way of life, doing whatever we felt we could get away with, sin was calling most of the shots as the old law code hemmed us in. Mm-hmm. And this made us all the more rebellious. In the end, I'll keep going.
You keep going.
we all had to show for it. It was miscarriages and stillbirths, but now that we're no longer shackled to that domineering maid of sin and out from under all those oppressive regulations and fine print, we're free to live a new life in the freedom of God.
And you want to?
No.
What do you make of all of that?
I make of that nothing other than questions.
Okay. All right. Ask some questions. Let's go there. Ask some questions. And
what
let's
does
have a
it mean, free life? We're free to live a new life in the freedom of God. So before we were shackled to this.
The old landlord?
The old landlord, which we talked about, who ruled us before, who was domineering, aggressive, demanded payment and all sorts of things. We were shackled in that life. It's dead now because we've moved into this new landlord with Christ.
Mm-hmm. And we legally, his argument here is that it's like the lease on the old place has been broken. You've been given the right to break the lease on the old place through what Christ has done. His death cancelled that lease for you.
It cancelled that lease.
So the landlord can come back saying, you owe me, and we can say, no, we don't owe you anything.
Yes.
Christ has paid to have that. Anything that was outstanding on that lease has been paid.
Yep.
In Christ. We don't owe you anything anymore. You have no claim on us anymore. And he uses this metaphor of this marriage thing to say it's like we are legally now able to marry into Christ's family because we have been widowed from the family of the old landlord or the old sinful nature.
Okay, so what you're saying there is if I have done something in my past and I regret it, usually you do those things.
Yep.
And then you seek God's forgiveness for it. You've hurt people in doing it. You've sought God's forgiveness for it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean I don't have to seek his forgiveness in 5 years' time when I am reminded about that again?
I would say, yeah, if it's the same issue that's coming up repeatedly, no, Hebrews says Christ has dealt with it once and for all. So I think it's more about appropriating, reminding the landlord, reminding yourself, no, I'm attached to a new landlord now. I'm part of a new family. I'm married, to use that analogy in Romans 7 there, I'm married to a new spouse. I don't need to think about the old one anymore. Away you go. I'm already widowed from you. You died. Mixing all these metaphors together. You died. I don't have to listen to you anymore.
So the past is the past. It's done.
Mm-hmm.
It's now dead.
Yes, that's it.
It has no right to take any claim of any stake in my new life.
That's right. It can't come and make you go back. And it has no, let's put it this way, there are no legal grounds for you to have to go back to it. The choice, Paul is saying, is we have a choice. We can willingly go back to Egypt. We can willingly cross the river, to use the analogy you used last episode, and go back to the old landlord. But there's nothing legally binding that requires us to go back. So all we need to do is make sure we're looking at the right contract and rip up the old contract because it has no power over us anymore.
So having said that, let's say those old memories come back in. I can invite those memories back in.
And we're putting the contract back together when I do that.
Yeah, putting it back together. But I can actually say, no, you cannot come in anymore. This is so weird
we
to talk about.
We can, provided we do it through Christ's strength. So the best way to do it is to not look at the old contract, but to actually look at the new contract. The new contract, because part of the new contract is I'm not obligated to the old contract anymore. I'm not obligated to my old spouse anymore because my old spouse is dead. So rather than focusing on telling the old spouse you're dead, start focusing on glorifying the new spouse that you've been rescued from the old spouse. The old spouse is dead. And then that's when you access the power, and the power of the old landlord, the old spouse, seems to diminish. So take your eyes off the old landlord, put your eyes on the new one.
Okay, so when the new landlord, to keep going with this, when the old landlord turns up at 3 a.m. at my door, banging on the door, gets me out of bed and says, hey, you actually owe me thousands of dollars. I can say to that landlord, that is a lie and a deceit, and it is not true. How many ways can you say the same thing?
Yep.
So be gone.
Yeah.
You are done.
Yep. And I would do it to stretch the metaphor further, I would do it by pulling out the new contract.
Ah, okay.
The new contract says the old contract's been defeated. It's been paid in full, which is what Jesus' words were on the cross. Teleos, paid in full. It's been paid in full. It's finished. Here's the new contract. You take it up with my lawyer. And guess who his lawyer is? Jesus.
Yeah.
So we're engaging the lawyer who has the authority to defeat the old one. We're not having to argue our own case. We're letting our lawyer argue our case for us.
Why is it so hard for people to grasp this concept of old life before Christ, dead?
Mm-hmm.
You have been forgiven for everything you have done. Okay.
Why is it hard? We're going to see why it's hard in the next little bit of Romans 7, because I think Paul is saying this is all good in theory, but in reality, in experience, or what we experience is at times an incredibly emotional, psychological pressure that makes us seem like the old landlord's claim is valid. And so that's what he's trying to say. And he's going to tell us, remind us that you cannot defeat the old landlord in your own strength. The way to do it is it's real, acknowledge it. The arm coming out of the grave feels strong, but you won't defeat it other than reminding yourself and getting deep into your spirit the new contract.
We mentioned the arm out of the grave in the previous chapter, by the way.
Yes, we did.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned in the first chapter this week that, that this being the book that every Christian, one of the scholars saying it's being the book that every Christian should memorize. I would say that makes sense to me, because the more you know this contract we're talking about, the quicker and easier it is to pull it out, and the old contract loses its power when you just state the new contract.
What verses talks about that? Should we just go right there?
Yeah, we can go right there. So this is going to be probably it might even be, it's down to verse 14, I think was where I was going. It's the struggle with sin. If you wanted to, it's skipped over a little bit, but if you want to go there.
Well, before that, I was just talking about the law.
Yeah, he's basically saying the law reveals our sin, which is building on the previous argument from the previous chapter. He's not saying the law is bad. He's saying the law reveals our sin.
Yeah, this is where it talks about you shall not covet.
That's where it is, yes.
Where we mentioned that in chapter 1.
Yes, that's right. In chapter 4.
Or chapter 2, I think.
Whatever it was.
Whatever we've been talking about.
Chapter 4 or chapter 5 this week we mentioned it.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's just showing how the law is pointing to sin, and how sin, this force, this black force, we've talked about this previously, on the natures of sin. Go back to episodes in the middle of 2023 and you'll see some of that. We talked about sin. We won't go there today in the same degree, but this black force kind of attaches itself to us through the law and tries to make us black and defeated and sinful, but Jesus has defeated that black force. But then in verse 14, do you want to read it in the Message?
I will. I'm just going to go back here to verse 7, because just to sum up that bit, if the law code was really bad, it's no better than sin itself. The law code had a perfectly legitimate function. Without its clear guidelines for right and wrong, moral behavior would be mostly guesswork. Apart from the succinct surgical command, you shall not covet, I could have dressed covetousness up to look like a virtue and ruined my life with it. And we do need to talk about that, because Paul makes a lot of effort to talk about how good the law is later on, that the law was good.
Yep.
The law wasn't a bad thing.
No.
We failed the law.
So what Paul's argument is that sin, this virus, 8. To use an analogy, they didn't understand viruses in those days, but let's bring it into the modern context. Sin is like a virus that attaches itself to something in us. And the law, the moral code of right and wrong, makes us aware of the right and wrong, and then this virus almost attaches itself to the sinful part of us and draws us into sinful behavior, because suddenly we see what we should be doing, and we end up doing the opposite of that. That's the sin virus, and that is what Jesus is the antidote to. He is the inoculation against that virus. In fact, he killed that virus when he died on the cross.
Got it. You summed that up very nicely there.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. And we get it now with all COVID stuff.
Yeah, with COVID. That's right. I mean, I don't think I would have got that analogy across 5 years ago, but it is helpful. It's in a metaphor. It's imperfect, but it has helped me to understand a bit about what this sin is, because Paul talks about sin as not something that we do. He describes it as some kind of external thing that attacks us. That's what he's thinking of it as, definitely thinking of it like that.
Yeah, I'll just keep going here before we skip ahead. The law code started out as an excellent piece of work. What happened, though, was that sin found a way to pervert the command into a temptation, making a piece of forbidden fruit out of it. The law code, instead of being used to guide me, was used to seduce me. Without all the paraphernalia of the law code, sin looked pretty dull and lifeless, and I went along without paying much attention to it. But once sin got its hand on the law code and decked itself out in all that finery, I was fooled and fell for it. The very command that was supposed to guide me into life was cleverly used to trip me up, throwing me headlong. So sin was plenty alive, and I was dead. I was stone dead. But the law code itself is God's good and common sense, each command sane and holy counsel.
Yes.
And then this is what we were talking about here before. Does that mean I can't even trust what is good? Is good just as dangerous as evil? No, again, sin simply did what sin is famous for doing, using the good as a cover to tempt me to do what would finally destroy me. By hiding within God's good commandments, sin did far more mischief than it could ever have accomplished on its own. Was that the verse you were trying to...
I think that was partly where I was going. And can you see how in all of you've just read there, Eugene Peterson done a superb job there in the message of personalizing or giving sin its own identity. He uses all the language he uses. Sin is doing stuff to us in that way that's written there. It's like sin has its own personality or it's its own life force, almost like it's its own intelligence.
Yeah, like it needs to be beaten and put to death.
Yes, that's right. And it's trying to do stuff to us. It's not just some, we say this about viruses. Viruses don't have an intelligence, but they act like they have an intelligence, in the sense that they know what they grow through attacking certain things. That's how he's describing it here. It's like this is an external force that is doing something against us. When we come into contact with the good nature, when we see the goodness of the law, the rules, there's a broken part of us that the sin virus attaches to. And that's how he's describing it there. And I like that because I think that's how we have to see sin. It's this enemy we have that we are struggling with. And
it's the old landlord.
It's the old landlord coming back.
Yeah,
that's right. It's there trying to bring us back all the time.
It's something outside of us, but also within us. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's how Paul
sees it.
It's
also a part of us.
Yeah, well, Paul say it in a moment. He says, "Not me doing it." He says in Romans 7, "It's not me. It's not me doing it. It's sin living in me that does it." We'll go there in just a moment. See how he's sort of saying that? It's not that he's exempting himself from it. He's recognizing that what sin is doing is it's doing something inside his sinful nature, his flesh. So the flesh nature, this unredeemed, broken part of him, is infected by this sin. And that leads to him doing sinful things. So he recognizes that there's an external sin force that has he doesn't recognize it as a virus, but has merged in with him so much so that the virus has become so inseparable to him that it's like it's him doing it. And that's what he needs to be rescued from. And that's what Christ rescues him from. That's why I like the inoculation mentality. When you have faith in Christ, it's like you just get a shot in the arm that kills this virus. And it will keep, like the landlord, it will keep coming knocking back. But the difference is that you've been inoculated against it. And the way, to stretch the metaphor, I've never done this before, but we have to keep getting inoculations to stay, because eventually they lose their intensity, right? It's not that the inoculation loses its intensity. It's the Christ's inoculation is powerful, but we need to keep applying it to our bodies, to our lives, for it to continue to have its effectiveness over this sin nature. So every 6 months or 12 months, you've got to get your flu vax. It's just there's a bit of the old one there, but there's not enough of it. And what we're doing by focusing on Christ, every time we're doing that, we're giving ourselves a fresh shot in the arm of a new inoculation against sin. But if we aren't focusing on Christ, it's like we're saying, I don't need a needle, I've got it. And we are opening up our sinful nature again to this old landlord that's trying to come and attack us.
So we need to remind ourselves constantly of what Christ has done
and how Christ has set us
free.
Yep. Yeah.
So when the landlord comes at 3 a.m., I don't know why it's 3 a.m., but it sounds like a good hour.
Sounds like a good hour for someone to knock on your door.
We have to remind ourselves by speaking out loud, I guess.
Yeah, that's right, declaring it.
Yeah, declaring, I am a child of God, I am set free.
Yep.
His blood has set me free. His body crucified
has defeated you.
Has defeated you.
You're dead. You're in the grave.
You're dead.
The contract's broken. Yeah. I like the dead. The contract is null and void. This is my new contract. I live a rich, abundant life with beautiful promises. I'm going to focus on that.
Yeah.
And the more you focus on the promises of the new contract, the less appealing the old contract seems anyway.
Yeah. And so when I say to this sin at my door, this landlord, it's so funny to speak like this.
Oh, these are both really good metaphors, 3 or 4 metaphors we're using here, but they're really good at helping us to grasp with this concept.
Okay. So I will say to that landlord, you are dead. And then I can say to myself, through Christ, I am given life.
Life.
Yes.
I love that. Life.
And not just an abundantly and exceedingly, what's that verse?
Exceedingly abundantly above
life.
Yep.
So that's something that we can say to ourselves when the arms try to grab us, when the tentacles of sin try to shame us or remind us or cause us to step back into our old habits of our sinful nature, fleshy nature. We can say those things, right?
Absolutely.
You're dead,
Yep.
and believe it.
Yes, absolutely. You're dead. You have no power in my life.
Oh, does it work that way as well when we were talking about Abraham saying that he believed, that he had faith and that he dreamt? Can I say to sin, I believe you are dead? Through my faith in God, you are still dead. You have no claims on me. I am dreaming of better things of my life because of my faith in God and how he works for me. I have hope because of my faith and trust. And what else did I say? Trust. And I am in grace. I live in a life of grace where the tentacles and the arms of the landlord can't get me anymore.
Yep, that's beautiful.
Can I say all that?
Yep, you say all that, and the power of the old life, the sin nature, the old landlord will dwindle. The old song used to sing, "Can't turn your eyes on Jesus and look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace." How do I stop looking at the old landlord? I start looking at the new one. And then suddenly the old one doesn't look very appealing anymore and it goes quiet.
Yes.
Landlord will go and find someone else to attack because he's not going to get anywhere with you.
Resist the devil and he will flee.
Yes, but 2 Peter, I think it is, it says, submit yourselves to God, resist the devil and he will flee. So that illustrates what I'm saying. I cannot say it enough. We cannot resist the devil without first submitting ourselves to God. Our primary focus is not the devil. There is a focus on that, but it always comes from the place of first submitting yourself to God, first focusing on the new contract, first acknowledging I'm your landlord, I'm not the other one. I'm your tenant, I'm not the other one. So the more we focus on the new, the less powerful the old becomes.
Kenny Bartley recently opened my mind up to something new. Bartley said in his recent message on David as the heart of worship, David's heart of worship, he defined the enemy, the devil. Now, I've often thought of the devil as, you can draw a picture of I don't know, bull head with horns. Oh, yeah,
the horns and all that.
Or whatever. And I've kind of wondered, how would the devil affect me in my life? Why would he, first of all, even bother? But let's say, how is the devil trying to get his tentacles into my life? And Bartley summed it up when he said the enemy is anything like depression, anxiety, worry, stress, fear, shame, those things. That's what he said the enemy was. And the enemy will use those things in my life to keep me bound under the old landlord in the old house rather than living in the new house with my new master.
That's right. And it's not that there's all kinds of biological reasons why people have suffering, shame and anxiety and depression, all that sort of stuff. So not removing the physiological reasons, but it's saying that is a tool that the serpent will use to detract you from living in the new house. You feel like it's too hard to live in the new house. I'll go back to the old house.
Yeah. Well, let me just put it in this perspective, which I think anybody will understand this. How many times have you been awake at night between the hours of 2:30?
I can tell you the hours that keep me awake. It's always, for me, it's always between 2 and 4.
Worried, stressed, all of those things. That to me is, Bartley summed that up very well as that's the enemy.
That's right.
Causing me to not live in peace.
Not live in peace. Yep. Go back to the old way. Yep. It's this battle to which one are you going to believe? Which one are you going to believe? And the only way to defeat it is to focus on believing the new report more than focusing on ignoring the old report. And if you think about it, in those anxious hours in the early morning hours of the morning when whatever stresses you're facing, the more we ruminate on trying to defeat and argue with the stress, the longer it will take us to get through that thing. But if you can, in that moment, find or have access to the new report and read the new report and confess that, if you have confession statements from the scriptures and you confess that, that is a much, much quicker way and a much more powerful way to defeat the voice of the anxiety and the depression and the stress. Because what you're doing is you're feeding yourself on who you are and who you're supposed to be and who you've been made in Christ, rather than just trying to overcome the voice of the enemy in your own strength.
Instead, I could ruminate on verses like, be still and know that I am God. He gives me exceedingly
abundantly above.
Never remember that.
I am more than a conqueror through him who loved me.
Yeah.
You could look at some of these verses in Romans. The riches of God that he's forgiven me, all the things that he has given us. Find out anything that tells you what Christ has done for you. What are the implications of what Christ has done for you? Focus on those things. Paul says in Philippians 4, whatever is good and noble and excellent and praiseworthy, think about such things and the peace of God will be with you. There's a recipe for it. So if you want to get peace in the middle of the night, think about the things that are good and excellent and noble and praiseworthy. Don't think about the things that are bad or what could go wrong. Think about what God has done and what God is doing and trust that, and that will bring you peace.
And when we do that, are we moving from our old life of sin and death into our new life, kingdom life?
Yep, absolutely.
Of blessings. And
we're making sure we stay in the right house and we're not going back to the old landlord.
Because Paul sums it up here. He says, where is that verse here? I should have read. I've tried everything and nothing helps. I'm at the end of my rope. He says, the moment I decide to do good, sin is there to trip me up. I truly delight in God's commands, but it's pretty obvious that not all of me joins in that delight. Parts of me covertly rebel, and just when I least expect it, they take charge. So he's describing what we've been talking about here. So this is not a new thing. This has been talked about for thousands of years.
And what I love about this passage, Jeannie, is that without this passage, it would be easy to look at the previous few chapters of Paul and go, oh, that's all right for you, Paul. You know, that's all waxing lyrical and it's beautiful language and it's all very ethereal and very idealistic. But what he's doing here is he's identifying with us. He's going, guys, I know that everything I've said seems idealistic, but I face the same challenge you face. I face the landlord knocking on my door at 3 o'clock in the morning. I get that. And he's actually identifying to the point where he's saying, I feel wretched. What a worthless, wretched man I am. He's describing what we all feel when that landlord is harassing us. So that's where he's coming from. And that's what gives this power, that this whole passage gives this power, because he points us back to Jesus. The only one who can rescue us from these feelings and these experiences is focusing on the new landlord.
Yeah, and he says it here. The answer, thank God, is that Jesus Christ can and does. He acted to set things right in this life of contradictions where I want to serve God with all my heart and my mind, but I'm pulled by the influence of sin to do something totally different.
Yep. Beautiful. It's a very well-known passage. Well, it should be. It should be one that we visit often. Let me just read it in the NLT really quick. We don't have to comment on it, but I think it's just good for our listeners to see where he's going. He says, because it builds an argument. He says, the trouble is with me. I'm all too human. I'm a slave to sin. I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do the things I hate. But if I know that what I am doing is wrong, this shows me that I agree the law is good, because I know that there's a standard. I know there's a good standard, and I know that it's right and I'm wrong. So I am not the one doing the wrong. It is this sin that's living in me that does it. And I know that nothing good lives in me, in my sinful nature. I want to do what's right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I am not really the one doing it. It's this sin nature living in me that does it. And I've discovered this principle of life. When I want to do what is right, when I want to live with a new landlord, when I want to do the right thing, I inevitably keep going back to the old landlord. I keep going back to the old way. I love God's law. I love the new landlord with all my heart. But there's this other landlord, this other power within me that's at war in my mind, that's knocking on me at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's that landlord. And he says, oh, what a miserable person I am. It seems like this point of hopelessness. Then he's going to link it back to all these arguments. Who's going to free me from this life that is dominated by the old landlord, by the sin and death? Who's going to defeat this old contract? Thank God. This is the bit you read. Thank God the answer is in Jesus Christ. So that is the point. Now let's just keep looking at the new landlord. Let's keep focusing on the new contract.
He really sums up the human condition there, doesn't he?
It's an amazing piece of psychology.
Yeah, I'm sure philosophers around him at the time were talking about all of that.
Absolutely. Certainly were.
In Greek.
Absolutely.
In Greece.
Yep.
Yeah, and in Rome, everyone. It's what we talk about.
That's exactly right. And this isn't just a Christian. This is a human condition. People outside of Christ still recognize they want to live a certain way and they don't. This is a human problem. We all wrestle with this sense of right and wrong, but coming up short. That's what he's describing. And he's describing that there's no hope for us other than Christ is what he's trying to build. Yep. The Jews, remember he's talking to Jews? They thought their hope was in their identity, in their Jewish identity. Meanwhile, you've got Gentiles who are anti the Jewish identity saying, our hope is in our freedom. We can live however we want. And he's going, no, neither is true. Your hope is in what Christ has done and Christ has done alone.
Yeah, and in saying that, he's calling us as well to a higher life, that there is a higher life through Christ.
Yes. Amen.
Amen. Let's move on.
All right, one to go. Talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bible. Wait, what? Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And you can also find us on all the socials. Just search The Bible. Wait, what? And to find out more about our church, just search C3 Camden, C3 Picton, or C3 Thirroul on the web or on the socials. Thanks for being with us today, and we look forward to talking to you on the next episode of The Bible. Wait, what?